I'm going to make kimchi. Those of you that have been to see me will know that it's one of the ferments I recommend to people because it's very easy to make and it contains lots of probiotics. So what do you need? You need a Napa cabbage. Now, make sure it's reasonably fresh. You don't want some terrible old wilted cabbage from the supermarket that somebody is trying to get rid of and is way beyond its date, even though we're going to take the water out of it. You need a Chinese Daikon radish. Again, if you go into some shops, they're really bendy and old. Don't buy those. It needs to be quite solid and stiff and fresh. I live in an area where there's lots of Chinese people, so this is standard in my supermarket, but you may need to find a Chinese grocer to get one. A couple of red peppers, otherwise known as capsicums in different parts of the world. A whole piece of garlic, not the little ones, but the whole thing. This is really going to be tasty. It's going to be marvelous. And cayenne pepper, red pepper. I particularly like cayenne pepper because I want the kimchi to have lots and lots of flavour. Common salt. Now, I often say to people, do buy some salt with iodine added, because a lot of us are iodine deficient. We're not living by the sea, we're not eating seaweed, and there's a lot of thyroid problems with many people. So I say if you're going to buy household salt, buy with iodine added. You need 2 big bowls, or 1 giant bowl if you have 1 giant bowl, a good size strainer, and mason jars. I love mason jars. I do a lot of fermenting and making things, and this particular kind from the supermarket has this little pull-out cap, and what that does is when it's fermenting, it allows the gases to get out of it. Also, the reason I get these is because they're sort of square shape and they fit perfectly in the door of the fridge. So the door of my fridge is like a shelf of fermenting things. There's homemade yogurt, there's sauerkraut, and there's kimchi. So it doesn't take up all the room on the shelves in your fridge. You also need a jug because you're going to make the sauce. I use a wand to make the sauce, but if you haven't got a wand, you can use a bar mix, or they call it a kind of mixer, do they call it in other parts of the world. A standard mixer you make juices in, or if you want, you can just use a whisk as you make the sauce. I've taken the leaves off from outside of the cabbage, rinsed them and cleaned them, and then I've halved the cabbage in 2, chopped it up and rinsed it in the strainer so that it's clear, because if it's not organic, it may have had some pesticides or something on it, so you need to give it a good rinse. It's quite bulky once you've chopped it, so this is 2 bowls. And there's quite a lot of bulk. I'm going to use half a mug of salt in each one. This will bleed the cabbage. It will bring the water out of the cabbage. And we're going to let it stand with the salt mixed into it. Probably for about an hour, but you need to fold it over and mix it in, and you'll see what happens when it's all bled out. And but you have to mix the salt in thoroughly so the whole of the cabbage has had the water bled out of it, and then leave it for 1 hour. While the cabbage has been bleeding, I have chopped the Daikon radish in half, and I have 2 plates, one for each bowl. I've also used 1 capsicum, and I've chopped the Daikon radish into small cubes and the capsicum into small strips. I've got half the bulb of garlic in each plate, so there's lots of garlic. If it was up to me, I'd put a whole bowl in each bowl, but you don't want to be known at meetings as the garlic queen, do you? So here we are. Here is the cabbage now, and there's lots and lots of water in it where it's all bled out. Now the salt in it needs to be rinsed off, because you don't want to keep the salty water in there, and you don't want the whole dish to taste too salty. So give it a good rinse out. When we come to fermenting the kimchi, the salt that remains in the cabbage after you've rinsed it is enough to ferment the kimchi. You don't need to add any more. It's quite enough to ferment the kimchi. I've now added the garlic, the Daikon radish and the capsicum to the cabbage. I've also mixed up 2 mugs of water, preferably filtered or purified or spring water, to 2 heaped tablespoons. Now when I say a tablespoon, we must be careful here. What I actually mean is a dessert spoon. 2 heaped dessert spoons into the 2 mugs of water in a jug, and mixed it together with the wand. So you've got the mixture. You pour half of that into each of the bowls. So now we have all mixed together with the ferment. And it's time to put it into the jars. You need clean jars, and that's very clear. Lots of people put their jars in boiling water. I don't bother with that. But you also need to press it down when you do it, so that you have taken up the space in the jar. I actually got 2.5 jars out of this mixture. Each jar, I really press the contents down, and when you press the contents down, the fluid rises to the top, so you've got really compressed kimchi inside. With the one that's half a jar, again I've pressed it down a lot, and I used any extra fluid from the mixture to pour on this one to cover the top of it. It's important to have the top covered. Normally I would put that outside on the balcony for 4 days to ferment, if it was spring, summer or autumn here in Sydney. But it's winter at the moment, so it's a little bit cold out there and it won't ferment it. So I'm keeping it on the side in the kitchen in a deep dish, and because the ferment is going to come out and spill over, and with the chili, if you've got it on a white surface or something, it could stain the surface. Twice a day, just take the jars out and clean the tray. Also, every day just take the top off and make sure there's enough fluid so that the top isn't dry. You put a little bit of extra distilled water on the top just to fill it up over the 4 days. You will hear bubbling. It's quite funny if you're sitting around in the kitchen, you hear this bubble, bubble, hiss. So it's really good. So 4 days, and that's the beauty of kimchi. 4 days and it's ready to eat. So I'm going to taste it. This is the peppery one. I love the peppery one. I absolutely love it. You might not want to put as much pepper in, and you might want a ginger one. Or you can use some other herbs if you like other herbs. But personally, I like the pepper one. I really like the pepper one. If the pepper is too hot for you, you can put some soya yogurt on it, so it cools it right down. I like it accompanied with cashew yogurt, because the cashew yogurt's a bit cheesy and it sort of complements it. So here goes. Oh, oh, that's hot. Oh, that's hot. That is hot. Oh, it's wonderful. Oh yes, that's lovely. Ah. Mmm. Mmm. Really good. Now you can, with the top on, you can keep that in the fridge for 4 months or so. It doesn't last that long in our house because it gets eaten all the time. But be sure you go into the fridge every 4 or 5 days and just take the top off and ensure the level of the water is covering the kimchi itself, because it still ferments in the fridge very, very slowly, so it may lose some fluid. Happy kimchi!